A child dies for a few minutes and comes back with a secret that no one expected. Having never heard of it, she describes a brother she never met, a baby her parents lost before he was even born. How is this possible? What did she see on the other side? In this unprecedented account of a near-death experience, you will discover a real story that defies science and moves even the most skeptical. Tunnel of light, mysterious presences, a message coming from beyond. Could this be definitive proof that the soul is still alive? Get ready for a breathtaking testimony that could change the way you view life and death. What this child said when he came back will give you goosebumps. Oliver, just 4 years old, lived with his parents in Asheville, North Carolina, a city surrounded by mountains and forests, where life followed a peaceful rhythm. He was a child full of energy, curious, always asking questions about everything. His eyes sparkled as he explored his backyard, and his laughter echoed through the hallways, bringing joy to his family. But no one imagined that, on a seemingly ordinary day, their life would change forever. It all started with a fever that wouldn't go away. At first, parents believed it was just a cold, something kids get all the time. But as the days passed, Oliver began to feel worse. He complained of pain in his stomach, lost his appetite, and before long, he was no longer able to get out of bed. His worried parents took him to a local hospital. The exams revealed something frightening. Oliver had a serious appendicitis problem and needed surgery immediately. The infection was spreading and the risk was great. The doctors were blunt. If the surgery wasn't done quickly, the consequences could be fatal. The mother held her son's hand as he was taken to the operating room. Fear took over. Oliver was so small, so fragile. What if something went wrong? The father tried to remain calm, but his gaze fixed on the ground betrayed his anguish. The minutes felt like hours as they waited. Then something happened. In the middle of surgery, Oliver's heart stopped. Doctors sprung into action immediately, trying to revive him. The monitors beeped. The medical team's hands moved quickly. One of them announced, "Cardiac arrest." Resuscitation attempts began. Time passed. Oliver had been dead for a few minutes, but when he came back, he didn't come back alone. When he opened his eyes in the recovery room, his mother ran to him, relieved. But the first thing he said made her world stop. "Mom, I met my brother." The father, who was next door, did not react. Oliver was an only child. How could he have known a brother? The mother tried to smile, believing it was a dream or an effect of the anesthesia, but before she could ask anything, Oliver continued. "He said he was always with you, that you miss him, but he was never really far away." The mother's breathing became ragged. She knew exactly what he was talking about. Before Oliver was born, she became pregnant for the first time. Happiness took over the family, but the joy was interrupted by a miscarriage in the first months of pregnancy. It was a silent pain, a lonely mourning. They never talked about it. They never mentioned this baby to Oliver. Then, how could he know? His mother held his hand tightly, trying to find the words, but Oliver wasn't finished yet. He held me by the hand and took me to a beautiful place, full of light, of love. He said it wasn't my time, that I needed to come back to you. But he wanted you to know he's okay, that he was always with you. The tears that the mother had been trying to contain now flowed freely. Dad closed his eyes, unable to believe what he was hearing. But then came the final shock. Oliver looked directly at his mother and said a name, the name the parents had chosen for their lost baby. Time stopped. The silence in the room was absolute. The mother's heart raced, and her entire body became paralyzed. The father widened his eyes, unable to process it. They had never spoken that name to anyone. So how did Oliver know? After that day, the family was never the same. What happened during the surgery? Was it just delirium caused by the anesthesia, or something much bigger? What did Oliver experience while his heart was stopped? Did he really find someone on the other side? And that was just the first revelation, because in the following days, he started to tell more details. Things no one expected to hear. Near-death experience accounts reveal secrets that defy everything we know, and that's just the beginning. This story moved you. Don't ignore this call. Sign up now and continue this journey, because there is so much more to discover. And leave your like. This message can reach those who need to hear it most. At the exact moment the monitors began to beep, and Oliver's heart stopped. Something indescribable happened. From the doctor's and nurse's point of view, he was there, lying on the operating table, motionless, with no vital signs. But for Oliver, everything seemed completely different. He felt no pain. He felt no fear. In fact, there was a lightness, an absolute peace that he had never experienced before. One moment he was in the operating room, surrounded by doctors desperately trying to bring him back, and the next moment, he was above it all, watching the scene as if he were a silent spectator. He could see his own body, and that was what scared him the most. He saw himself lying on the gurney, the tubes connected, the oxygen masks, the surgeon's nimble hands moving urgently. He saw the head doctor's frown, saw the sweat running down the face of one of the nurses, heard the tension in the voices around him. But none of that seemed to matter. There was no despair within him. It was as if he were watching a movie, something that no longer belonged to him. He tried to call his mother, tried to tell her that he was fine, that they didn't need to worry, but no one listened to him. It was then that he realized he was not alone. He felt a presence beside him. At first, it was just a feeling, like someone was there, watching him with him. But when he turned his head, he saw someone standing there, smiling at him. It was a boy. Oliver felt his heart, or what was left of it, speed up. The boy looked a little older, maybe 6 or 7 years old. He had bright eyes, a kind look, an indescribable peace in his expression. There was something about him that made Oliver feel safe, protected, as if somehow they had known each other for a long time. And then the boy spoke. "I was waiting for you, Oliver." The voice was calm, soft, like a whisper that echoed inside his mind. Oliver didn't understand at first. Who was that boy? How did he know your name? But before he could ask, everything around him began to change. The operating room is gone. The noise of monitors, voices, machines, everything disappeared. Suddenly he was in a completely different place, a place he had never seen before, but somehow felt familiar. It was a vast field, bathed in golden light. It wasn't like sunlight, which can be hot and blinding. It was a soft, welcoming glow that seemed to come from all directions at once. The air was light, purer than anything he had ever breathed. Oliver felt a pleasant warmth surround him, as if he were being embraced by something invisible, something that brought a peace he couldn't explain. The boy was still at his side, watching him with a gentle smile. "I'm your brother, Oliver." The words hit him like a shock. Brother? But he had no brothers. At least that's what he always thought. But deep down, something inside him seemed to recognize that boy. He didn't seem like a stranger. There was a connection there, something he couldn't describe. "But I don't have a brother," Oliver muttered, confused. The boy laughed softly and shook his head. "Yes, he has, but I couldn't stay." At that moment, something awakened inside Oliver, a strange feeling, as if a void he never knew existed was suddenly being filled. He looked at the boy, trying to understand what that meant, but before he could say anything, the boy extended his hand. "Come with me. I want to show you something." Oliver hesitated for a moment, but something inside him told him it was safe. He took the boy's hand, and in the next instant, they were somewhere else. Now he saw a kind of garden, tall trees, with leaves that glowed as if they were made of liquid light. A crystal-clear river flowed in the distance, and there was a melody in the air. It was no ordinary music, but something that seemed to come from the environment itself, as if everything there had its own harmony. The place was beautiful, but what caught Oliver's attention most was the feeling of belonging. He felt part of that place. "Where are we?" he asked. The brother smiled and shook his hand. "At home." Oliver couldn't explain it, but he felt like crying. Not out of sadness, but out of emotion. It was as if he had waited his entire life to be there, without even knowing it. Everything made sense, and at the same time, nothing did. He wanted to ask so many questions, but then something changed. His brother's smile disappeared for a moment. He looked at Oliver with a serious, almost urgent look. "You can't stay." Oliver's eyes widened. "But I want to stay. I like it here. I like you." The boy held his hands tightly. "I like you too, Oliver. I have always been with you, but you have to go back." Oliver started to feel something strange, as if he was being pulled back. He looked around, trying to hold on, trying to stay there a little longer, but everything started to fade away. The light became more intense. The garden began to disappear. He heard his brother's voice echo in his mind. "Tell Mum and Dad that I've always been around." And then everything went dark. When he opened his eyes, I was back in the hospital recovery room. The cold light of the fluorescent lamps replaced the golden glow on the other side. The smell of medicine and disinfectant took the place of the gentle aroma of the heavenly garden. He heard the monitors beep, felt the weight of his own body again. His mother was crying beside him, holding his hand, and his father was right behind, teary-eyed, trying to maintain his composure. Oliver blinked a few times, trying to process everything. What had happened? Could it have been a dream, an illusion? But then he remembered. He remembered everything. He turned to his mother, still groggy, but with absolute certainty within him. He knew he needed to tell. He needed to say what he saw. "Mom, I met my brother." The mother's face froze. Her father exchanged a frightened look with her. Oliver felt his heart speed up. They knew what he was talking about. They understood. But that was just the beginning. Because Oliver didn't just meet his brother. He discovered a secret that no one expected. And have you ever heard stories like this? Do you believe that those who left can still be around us? Leave your comment and write, "I believe," if you have ever felt the presence of someone who is gone. The hospital recovery room was still silent when Oliver, his eyes still heavy and his mind confused, looked at his mother and said those words that would change everything. "Mom, I met my brother." Her heart raced. The father, who until then had tried to remain calm, exchanged a frightened look with his wife. That simple sentence, spoken with the innocence of a 4-year-old child, carried a weight they could never imagine. His mother squeezed Oliver's hand, trying to hide her shock, but he noticed the tremor in her fingers. How could he say something like that? They never talked about what happened before he was born. Never. "Which brother, dear?" the mother asked, her voice choked, not knowing if she really wanted to hear the answer. Oliver blinked slowly, took a deep breath, and then began to speak. "He was a little older than me. He had eyes like mine, but his hair was darker. He held my hand when I went to heaven. He said he already knew me and was waiting for me. He took me to a very beautiful place where everything was calm and bright." The mother's eyes widened. The father felt a chill down his spine. Oliver's every word was spoken with a frightening naturalness, as if he was just recounting something he saw on TV or that happened at school. But "I wasn't making it up." "Did he say that? What was waiting for you?" the father asked, trying to keep his voice steady, but feeling a shiver run through his entire body. Oliver nodded and, as if he understood that his parents were trying to find rational explanations for this, decided to tell exactly everything that happened. He began to describe his brother in detail. She said she didn't recognize him at first, but felt like she already knew him, as if they were connected somehow, as if they had shared something before they even found themselves in that place. The boy held his hand and led him to a field full of golden light. There was no sun, but everything was shining. The ground was soft like cotton, and there was a gentle wind, but it didn't move anything around. "He told me he was with you before, but he couldn't stay." The mother covered her mouth with her hands, trying to contain the sob that threatened to escape. Oliver continued, "He knew you missed him. He said that sometimes you think about him, even if you don't want to, and that this happens because he is around." The father looked at his wife with a mixture of astonishment and fear. How could Oliver know this? How could a 4-year-old who had never heard anything about the baby they lost describe something so accurately? But then came the moment that made that family's world fall apart. Oliver, his eyes shining, smiled softly and said, "Oh, he also told me a secret." The father leaned forward in his chair, feeling his stomach drop. "What secret, son?" Oliver looked directly at his mother, held her little hand and said, "He told me his name." The mother felt all the air escape from her lungs. The room became small, the walls seemed to close in around her. His heart was beating so hard it felt like it was going to explode. The father turned pale, holding tightly to the arm of the chair, trying to process what he had just heard. Oliver said the exact name of the baby they lost, the name they chose with so much care. The name that had never been spoken out loud since the day they received the devastating news that the pregnancy would not go ahead. The name that only the couple knew, kept in their most intimate memories, hidden in a painful corner of the heart. And Oliver, I had no way of knowing that. The father stood up, ran his hand over his face, trying to find a logical explanation, but there was none. There was no way to ignore what they were hearing. The mother, now crying, hugged Oliver tightly, feeling her skin crawl. "Did he say anything else, son?" she managed to ask, still holding his face in her hands. Oliver nodded and continued. "He said you don't need to be sad anymore, that he was never alone, and that he is waiting for you." Those words went through the parents like a knife. It wasn't sadness they felt at that moment, but rather a mixture of shock, emotion, and an indescribable feeling of peace. Oliver was saying something that no one could ever make up, was real. "Did he say anything else?" the father asked, his voice coming out almost like a whisper. Oliver looked at the two of them with a more serious look, as if he was processing it all again. Then he said, "Yes, he told me I needed to go back, that my mission here is not over yet." The mother shook her husband's hand. Those words echoed inside her in a strange way, as if they made sense even without explanation. "And what did you say to him?" Oliver smiled and said, "I asked if I could stay a little longer. I wanted to play with him, but he said I still couldn't. So I asked him to promise me that he will wait for me." And he promised. The tears that the mother had been holding back now flowed freely. The father held his head, trying to understand everything. How was this possible? Oliver sighed deeply and yawned. He was still tired. His body was still recovering from the surgery. But before closing his eyes, he murmured something that made his parents' spines shiver once again. "I can still feel him nearby. He's still here." Mom ran her hand through Oliver's hair, trying to compose herself. The father, still speechless, just held his wife's hand. There was no rational explanation for what they had just heard. Whatever happened on that operating table, it wasn't just a dream. Oliver had returned, but he returned with a message, and that was just the beginning. Oliver's mother was still holding his hand, but something inside her was different. The shock still took over his body, as if an electric current ran through every fiber of his being. Her heart was beating so hard that she could feel it beating in her temples. She looked at her son, that 4-year-old boy, who was still recovering from surgery, trying to find a rational explanation for what she had just heard, but there was no explanation. The father, who until then had been trying to maintain his composure, moved a little away from the hospital bed and ran his hands over his face, as if he were trying to wake up from a dream. He walked to the window, took a deep breath, but couldn't shake the avalanche of thoughts that were accumulating in his mind. He was always a logical man, someone who needed concrete proof before believing anything. But now he was faced with something that defied all laws of reason. That name. Oliver couldn't know. There was no way of knowing. They never talked about it, never mentioned it, never even brought it up after the loss. It was a silent secret, buried deep in their hearts, and yet their son was there, speaking those words as if it were the most natural thing in the world. The mother still felt teary-eyed. The head spun. She began to remember every moment of the interrupted pregnancy, the day the doctor shook his head and said there was no more heartbeat, the nights she spent crying in silence, the name they had chosen with so much love, but which was never spoken out loud to anyone other than the two of them. How could Oliver have known this? The mother looked at her husband, looking for some kind of answer. He remained silent, still facing away from them, staring into space. "He told me he was always around." That phrase kept ringing in her head. He was always around, but was it true? Could it be that all this time she felt the presence of that unborn child and simply ignored the signs? She remembered the times when, out of nowhere, she felt a tightness in her chest, an inexplicable longing as if she were remembering someone she had never met, of the nights he dreamed of a boy, a little older than Oliver, but whose face he could never see clearly. The father turned slowly, his eyes still reflecting the whirlwind of emotions within him. Then he said something that made his mother's world stop. "I dreamed about him once." The mother's eyes widened. "What?" The father swallowed hard, as if he was reliving the moment in his mind. "Shortly after you lost the baby. I didn't tell you because it seemed like just a dream, but I saw a boy." He looked at me and smiled. "I didn't know who he was, but now I think it was him." The silence in the room was almost deafening. The mother felt her body shiver. How come they never talked about this? How come they never noticed? Oliver was still there, watching his parents, waiting for them to say something. He didn't understand the scope of what he was saying, but he knew it was important. "I knew I needed to tell them. He showed me something before I came back." His mother turned to him quickly, feeling her stomach drop. "What, son? What did he show you?" Oliver was silent for a moment, as if he was trying to remember every detail. "He showed me a room I've never seen before, but he said it was his. It was blue. There were stars on the ceiling and a teddy bear on the bed." The mother lost her breath. The father held on to the chair. They never told anyone this. They never got around to setting up the room, but they had already started preparations before the loss. They had chosen a soft shade of blue for the walls and bought star stickers to put on the ceiling. The crib was never used, but on top of it, a brown teddy bear was waiting for the baby that never came. It was impossible. Oliver was never in that room because it never existed. They dismantled everything before he was even born. There were no photos, there were no records. Only they knew that. The father felt his hands tremble. This cannot be. The mother put her hand to her mouth, trying to hold back the tears. His entire body had goosebumps. He's actually been here, this whole time. The penny dropped at once. The pain they carried for so long, the absence they always felt, it all made sense now. He was there, always has been. But the revelations didn't stop there. Over the next few days, Oliver began to talk more about his brother. He described moments when he felt his presence, even before the near-death experience. He said he sometimes felt as if someone was next to him while he slept, that, when he had nightmares, he always felt a presence that calmed him down before his parents even arrived in the room. The mother began to recall some strange situations. Some nights he heard Oliver speaking softly, as if he were talking to someone. Others in which, when opening the door to his room, he found the boy looking at a fixed point on the ceiling, as if he were listening to something. But the scariest revelation came when they were looking through an album of old photos. Oliver flipped through the pages curiously, seeing photos of his parents before he was born, until suddenly he pointed to a particular photo. It was a photo of the mother when she was pregnant, with her hand on her belly. This is where he was. The mother felt a shiver run up her spine. "What do you mean, son?" Oliver looked at the photo and smiled. "He said he was inside, but then he had to leave. But he stayed close to you, and close to me." The father hurriedly closed the album and took a deep breath. "This is too much to process." The mother ran her hand over her face, trying to understand. Was all this real? Or were they losing track of reality? But deep down, she knew. I knew that was true, because it made sense, because it explained the inexplicable emptiness he always felt. Oliver looked at them calmly. "He told me he loves you, and he's going to wait for us. Always." Tears finally fell uncontrollably. His father hugged Oliver, feeling a mixture of love, longing, and a relief he never thought he would feel. The mother wrapped them in a tight hug, her heart feeling lighter than ever. "And you? Have you ever felt the presence of someone who has left? Have you ever experienced something that defied all logic? Comment below. I believe. If you have had an experience like this, or know someone who has gone through something similar, your comment may help others looking for answers. The days following Oliver's near-death experience were marked by profound change. His parents noticed that something inside him had changed. He was still the same sweet and curious child as before, but now he had something different in his eyes, a maturity that didn't seem to belong to a boy of just 4 years old. Before surgery, Oliver was always an energetic child who loved running around the yard, playing with his cars and asking questions about everything. But after returning from the hospital, his attitude changed. He was still playing, but he seemed more aware of what was going on around him. He spent more time looking at the sky, observing the clouds, as if he was trying to see something that others couldn't see. Sometimes he would stop in the middle of a game and remain silent, as if he was listening to something. His mother asked if everything was okay, and he just smiled and said, "I'm listening to my brother." This phrase began to be repeated frequently. At first, the parents tried not to pay much attention. Maybe it was just something that stuck in his mind after everything that happened. But as the days went by, they realized that this was real for Oliver. He spoke to his brother as if he were there, by his side. "He told me he likes to watch when we're together. He likes it when you laugh, when we tell bedtime stories. He misses you." Mom held back tears every time she heard something like that. The father was still trying to find a rational explanation, but deep down he already knew that there was no logic that could explain what they were experiencing. Another detail caught our attention. Oliver began to have more affectionate behavior, especially towards his parents. He hugged them more often, held his mother's hand out of nowhere, and told her he loved her. He started saying sentences that seemed too deep for his age. "Mom, did you know that love never ends? It continues even when we can no longer see the people we love." It was as if Oliver had learned something during his near-death experience that was beyond a child's understanding, as if he had returned with knowledge that did not belong to this world. One night when they were back home, the mother heard Oliver talking to himself in the room. She opened the door slowly and saw him sitting on the bed, looking at the empty space. He smiled and shook his head as if he was answering someone. "Who are you talking to, son?" Oliver turned to her and responded matter-of-factly, "With my brother. He always visits me before I sleep." The mother felt a shiver run through her body. "And what did he tell you?" Oliver shrugged and smiled. "That he loves me, who is always with me." The mother couldn't hold back her tears. He hugged Oliver and held him tight, feeling his heart racing. But the changes didn't stop there. Oliver began to have intense dreams, which he described in surprising detail. He talked about places that didn't exist, but that seemed real to him. It described a garden full of golden light, where the colors were more vivid and the sounds were soft and harmonious. "There, everything has music, Mum. Even the flowers sing." And perhaps most impressively, Oliver began to know things he had no way of knowing. Small details about his parents, about events that happened before he was even born. Once, during a family lunch, Oliver suddenly looked at his father and said, "Daddy, remember that time you cried looking at the sky because you thought you would never have a child?" The father froze. He remembered exactly that moment. It was a difficult day, shortly after the loss of our first baby. He was alone in the backyard, looking at the stars, and the tears came uncontrollably, but he never told anyone about it. "How do you know that, Oliver?" The father's voice came out almost like a whisper. Oliver gave a small smile and replied calmly, "My brother was there. He saw you, and he told me." Silence took over the room. The father lowered his head, trying to hold back his emotion. There was no possible explanation for this, but the most memorable moment came a few weeks later. Oliver was playing in the living room when, out of nowhere, he stopped and stared at his mother. His look was different, more serious. "Mom, did you know that everyone has a mission?" The mother frowned, surprised by the question. "What do you mean, son?" "I asked my brother why he couldn't stay with us. He told me that his mission was just to come, just stop by. But mine is to stay." The mother felt her heart accelerate. "And what is your mission, Oliver?" He took a deep breath, as if he was choosing the right words. "I still don't know everything, but I know there's something important I need to do. That's why I came back." The father, who heard everything from the kitchen, felt a shiver run up his spine. Oliver spoke with so much conviction that he didn't sound like a 4-year-old. He spoke like someone who really you knew, and since then his behavior has reflected that. He began to show even greater affection for the people around him. Whenever he saw someone sad, he would hold that person's hand and say, "Everything will be fine, love never ends." His mother began to notice that Oliver also became more sensitive to certain things. He avoided places with a lot of excitement. He said he didn't like places where the energy was heavy. He also began to say that he saw lights around people, that some were brighter and others seemed dim. When someone is sad, the light becomes weak. But when a person truly loves, the light becomes very bright. And then came the final message. One night, when his mother was putting Oliver to sleep, he held her hand and said, "Mom, I'm still going to see my brother again." The mother swallowed. "Are you going, my love?" Oliver nodded. "Yes, but only when the time is right. He said that one day we will meet again, all of us." The mother couldn't hold back her tears. He kissed Oliver's forehead and covered him, feeling his heart sinking but at the same time lighter than ever. The impact of that experience was far beyond what they could have imagined. Oliver didn't come back from death with just memories. He came back with a message, something that would forever change the way his family viewed life, death, and what comes after. What happened to Oliver is one of those stories that makes us question everything we believe about life and death. How could a 4-year-old child describe something so profound, so full of details, something that simply couldn't know? Does this experience prove that the soul is still alive, that those who went before us are still around, watching us, guiding us, waiting for the right moment to meet again? If we stop to think, how many similar stories have we heard? How many people have had near-death experiences and come back with unbelievable reports? People who described intense lights, glowing tunnels, encounters with loved ones who are gone, voices that say it's not time to leave yet. And most impressively, many of these experiences have details in common, even when they are told by people from different cultures, different ages, different beliefs. And it's not just adults who have this type of experience. Children who have never heard about life after death describe things that defy logic. They talk about places of light, about presences that transmit love and peace to them, about messages that need to be delivered. They often say words that seem prophecies, as if they had access to knowledge that we, adults, cannot understand. What's most striking about Oliver's case is that he didn't just come back with memories, he came back transformed. Your way of seeing the world has completely changed. He began to have a different connection with people. He began to demonstrate a deeper love for those around him. He began to notice things that were simply not part of his reality before. He said he felt his brother's presence. He knew things he had no way of knowing. And this is a pattern that repeats itself in many other NDE cases. People who go through this experience come back different. Some lose their fear of death. Others start to believe that there is something much greater than the material life we know. Some develop a new sensitivity, a more acute spiritual perception. Others report that they began to see signs, began to notice presences around them, and began to feel that they were not alone. What if this is all more than just hallucinations? If these experiences are in fact windows into something that has always been here, but that we simply can't see? If we analyze the number of reports of people who have had near-death experiences, the number is impressive. Thousands of registered cases, people who experienced clinical death and came back to tell stories that defy any scientific explanation. Doctors have witnessed cases in which patients, after being resuscitated, described exactly what happened in the operating room while they were unconscious. Details that, technically, they shouldn't have been able to notice. And perhaps one of the most exciting aspects of all this is realizing that in many of these accounts, there is one constant: the love. The love that continues even after death. The love that connects us to those who have already left. The love that seems to be the only thing that never falls apart. Oliver didn't come back talking about fear, pain, or darkness. He came back talking about light, about a reunion, about a promise. I will still see my brother again. How many people have gone through something similar? How many families have lost a baby but felt in some way that he or she never completely went away? How many mothers report that even years later, they feel the presence of that child who was never born? If you are here listening to this story, perhaps you have already felt something like this. Maybe you've already experienced a moment when you were sure that someone was there, with you, even if you couldn't see it. Maybe you felt an inexplicable presence, heard a whisper in the silence, dreamed of someone who seemed more real than a simple dream. Maybe this has already happened to you. If these stories are repeated so many times, if so many stories have elements in common, can we still call all this a coincidence? Or is there something beyond what we can perceive with our eyes? If there's anything Oliver's experience teaches us, it's that death may not be the end. That those we love can continue to be close by, accompanying us, protecting us, waiting for us. That one day maybe we will all have this same experience and finally understand what's on the other side. And now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever been through something similar? Have you ever felt the presence of someone who has left? Have you ever heard stories like this? If so, share in the comments. Your experience may help others who are also looking for answers. Did anything in this video speak to you in a way that defies logic? The signs are everywhere, but not everyone notices them. There are mysteries that can change everything you believe, and what comes next will be even more surprising. Sign up now on the channel and continue this journey. You've come this far, but was that just a coincidence? Some truths cannot be ignored, and this message may have been a sign. Something bigger may be trying to show you the way. Leave your like now and help this revelation reach those who need to hear it before it's too late. Something still needs to be revealed, and what comes next could change everything you believe. The next video is already on the screen, but not everyone is ready for what they will discover. Click now and continue this journey, but be prepared.